There's something very specific going on with space games headed into 2026, and it's very easy to misunderstand what that actually is. You could look at what's being announced and assume it's just about games getting bigger or getting more content. That's the obvious take on what all of this is, but it's also the wrong one. What's actually happening here is far more important and much more difficult. A few major space games then are finally doing the thing that most studios avoid entirely. They're not just adding new content, instead they're trying to fix themselves. And what's more, if they successfully follow through with this, then it could end up being one of the most important shifts the genre has seen in years. What makes this especially interesting then is that this isn't isolated. It's happening across completely different games, made by different studios for different audiences, and they're all moving in the same direction for the same underlying reason. Let's start with the obvious ones then, because these are the best examples of what I actually mean. Also, if you haven't done so yet, I'd be massively grateful if you could subscribe. It really helps this channel and it gets these videos out to more people, which in turn can actually help these games. So let's talk about these games which are rebuilding themselves. There's two big space games doing that right now. Well, one is definitely doing it, the other is a possibility. Those titles are X4 and Starfield, and we'll talk about both of these. So X4 is a game that's always felt like it's a bit too big to actually be allowed to exist in many ways. It's one of the deepest single-player space simulations we've ever had, and at the same time, it's also one of the clunkiest, because it's carrying years of complexity, years of compromises, and years of decisions that just made sense at the time, but have slowly become weight around the game's neck. And the reason Egosoft's approach in X4 in 2026 is good is not just because they're doing the basics, such as Update 9 has weapons rebalance, or that there are AI improvements, or that there's a UI adjustment going in here. What's actually going on is far deeper. Egosoft are now doing the work that makes the future of the game, as well as important future updates, all entirely possible. And this is something that a lot of studios inherently avoid, because it requires a lot of work, it requires a lot of time and dedication, and there's not an instant financial reward to doing all of this. In short, they're paying down the technical debt that X4 has accumulated over the years. These are the kind of problems that limit what a game can be and what a game can actually become. And I suspect, even as you listen to this, you can think of a whole bunch of different games over the years that have fallen into this exact trap. Problems they've caused for themselves that they can't get out of. So, without these type of fixes, no matter how many DLC packs you stack up on top of the game, it all essentially remains with the same flaws. So, when a studio is willing to go back into a well-established game, rip out its guts, and to all intents and purposes rebuild the things that weren't working, well, that tells us a lot about the passion and the integrity of that studio. And it's honestly an amazing thing to see. And now, here's where things with the genre actually start to get really interesting. Because what you see here, you're also seeing the same type of wishes and desires in the community's conversations around Starfield. Yes, that game released 2 years ago, and in many ways it kind of died off and faded into the background, but it's never completely disappeared, and it's one of the biggest disappointments in the space game genre for many and many years. But if rumours are to be believed, well, Bethesda have actually been listening to all of these complaints and these requests. So these rumours, well, they began to swell back in December, and they are that Bethesda gave a behind-the-scenes look at what people are now calling Starfield 2.0. Multiple outlets on the internet have reported that these conversations took place, and they're described by some sources with first and second-hand knowledge of the entire event. Now, this has been framed as an update, as a major overhaul of Starfield rather than just a small routine patch. And this is a distinction that's actually vital here, because where the now common 2.0 label has originated is in the fact that the game is perhaps being rebuilt in some very specific ways. Although, to be very clear, there's no official words on this from Bethesda just yet, but a lot of very respected voices have commented on this and kind of assured that something is happening. And one of the most oft-cited changes is, well, to do with space travel and exploration. This seems to be a central focus of the proposed update. Many of the sources online, some of these quoted by journalists as well as other YouTubers, have said that the aim is to make space feel less fragmented, and this addresses the long-standing criticisms around frequent loading screens and the disconnected nature between space travel and planets, as well as orbit and space. Now, of course, no footage or technical demonstrations have been shown publicly, and the reporting was clear that this update is being positioned within Bethesda as an evolution of how Starfield plays, rather than just a content addition. In other words, it matches that theme we've seen started with X4 of a studio going into an established game, ripping out the guts and reworking the things that are, essentially broken. Now, it's also widely reported that this new Starfield update would not arrive alone. Instead, sources indicate that it is expected to launch alongside another major expansion, and this perhaps attaches into the idea that Bethesda are planning on a more ambitious reintroduction of Starfield, something we've seen with other failed games that went on to be a success in the past. So that's one side of what's going on with the space games, but it's by no means the only side. So let's take a step back and look at live service space games and the direction they're moving in, because this is all a part of the same pattern, but perhaps a different side of the same coin. So turning to Elite Dangerous, this has always been the purest vision of the space game. You're a pilot in a galaxy that really doesn't care about you, and when this game is good, it's really, really good. But Elite also has a pretty big problem, because whilst Elite isn't short on things to do, it is actually short on reasons to do those things. So this is where the new update in 26 comes in, called Operations, at least as far as it's being described. And this update is interesting because, it's not just about new missions. Instead, the promise, as far as we're seeing from Frontier, is that we're going to get in multi-stage structured gameplay that feels more like a guided arc than a single job on a board. In other words, it's an attempt to connect the moment-to-moment gameplay together. You'll be able to pick up a mission at a station, for example, on foot, go into a spaceship and start that mission, head on to a planetary settlement or maybe even a mega ship, dock, get out your ship and continue that mission on foot. And this is something that's very different for Elite and something that's long been needed. In a way, it's very similar to the approach that Hello Games used with No Man's Sky, because No Man's Sky itself has never really had a problem with the content, at least not in recent years. And also, I think it's fair to say that No Man's Sky has never really tried to become a deep space sim. Instead, what it is trying to do is something quite different. It's been a game that constantly gives you reasons to come back and reasons to engage with the content, and that's something we'll no doubt see more of going into 2026. Because yes, whilst throughout 25, Hello Games gave a load of new content to No Man's Sky, the big issue here was not just that we got new content, but also that we got new reasons to go and engage with that content. And it's the reasons, more specifically the reasons to engage, that make these games live or die. And that leads us on to one more thing that has been hanging over the genre for so long, it's now become somewhat of a myth. And that, of course, is Star Citizen. This is a game that's always lived in the future. It's always about what will be, about what it's becoming and what it's building toward, and that means that the genre is basically always watching the future, not as a game, but as a kind of ongoing process. We saw in late 2025 the introduction of the third new star system in Star Citizen called Nyx, and what's interesting here is that this is going to be more than, it's going to be more than another location ultimately. It's an idea here of a future of the game with multiple star systems. And sure, on the one hand, this is about new content, it is about expansion and making the game bigger, but it's also about reinforcing and building upon what makes this game have its own very unique identity. And that is a galaxy that's living, breathing, and very, very specific and vivid when it comes to detail. And then of course there's Squadron 42, which sits in this very strange position, at least as far as I'm concerned, because it's not really an update. But in many ways it really will function like one, because if Squadron 42 actually ships in its 2026 window, as CIG are hoping, then it becomes proof that something within the game, or within the Star Citizen universe, can indeed be finished, shipped and delivered. And if it not only arrives on time, but is also actually good and works very well, then the potential exists for this really to change the whole process, the perspective, the psychology, if you want, around the entire Star Citizen project. Because it would mean that despite taking absolutely years, over a decade in fact, to come to fruition, we've finally got a game that not only works, but is actually very good. That's a big if, of course, and some would understandably and quite reasonably say that this is perhaps a little bit too much to ask. But, either way, whether it actually succeeds, it does show the direction of 2026 and the direction that all of these games are heading in. And in many ways, it's about two different things going on at once. Firstly, rebuilding the foundation of a lot of these games, and secondly, ensuring and proving that these games actually have a future. Let me know what you think about all of this, because I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. There is another video on the screen right here if you want to check that one out. Do take care, and I'll catch you next time.